through ChatGPT, you managed to relearn all of the things that you knew and then some to practically be able to do what you're able to do today.
Yeah, I would almost liken it to slang. You leave high school and you hear what high school kids are saying. You're like, I don't understand any of these words that are being said, but they're still generally speaking English now instead of spending 6 or 7 hours diving down. If it doesn't work after 3 or 4 attempts, let's just pause, ask it again, like, hey, can we do this another way? Is there something simpler?
Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, Aydin, thanks for having me.
Excited to do this. So you and I, once upon a time, did very similar things. You started a company that did some things that were similar to Fellow. We've been on similar journeys. And so today you are more focused on building a lot of things with AI, lots of projects and software that you are putting out there, including Mello, which we'll talk about. But you're also building a lot of AI workflows and tools for some of your customers as well. So this is going to be really interesting because I remember when you and I first started chatting about this and you just talked about the sheer volume of things that you were doing. It was super mind blowing. So I thought this could be a really great conversation for everybody to hear, just to kind of get a sense of what's possible. So maybe let's start with that. What is your background? I mean, you do have a software engineering degree, so you are a developer. Walk us through roughly like your journey and what you're up to today.
Yep, absolutely. So like you mentioned, I did come out of computer engineering and I immediately jumped into management consulting. So, finished university and I was like, let's get out of here and let's just learn about business. And that was sort of the end of when I was dedicatedly coding for quite a long period of time. I worked in consulting in sort of the strategy management, especially focused on OKR space implementations at, organizations like Bobcat or IBM and stuff like that, as well as really small organizations too, where, maybe it's 15, 20 people. And that sort of led us to interact with all of these different OKR software vendors, people like Lattice and Betterworks and Quantive and all these different guys. And at some point, an investor sort of stumbled across us and was like, hey, would love some advice. I'm trying to build one of these products. I've just sort of kicked off. And somehow my brother and I convinced him that we should actually join and run the company. And so we did that. We jumped on really early, built this OKR software company, brought in all of our consulting clients, and sort of grew the business and sold very shortly afterwards. So it was a quick sort of 2-year turnaround with sort of explosive growth right at the start. Worked for that acquiring company for a little bit, took a brief break, and then started building a lot more of these tools now, which are focused on process, optimization or automation because of all of the things I would see in these various companies that I was helping. So I dealt with a lot of our customers as we built HireBook, the OKR software. Then again, internal issues as I was working at sort of the next few companies I was working on. And myself and my partner who I'd met at the acquiring company, we were like, yeah, we're both seeing these same sort of internal process problems. And that's sort of where Mello spawned out of was, how do we create essentially a digital process manager for people to execute processes better? Because we have a bunch of project management tools like Asana or, Trello or anything along those lines, Monday.com, but nothing that's really focused on those repetitive day-to-day processes that, we go through every single day. Or, we might have hundreds of threads of these going on at once, like hiring employees or, financial stuff, building presentations, things that if they're standardized across the organization, help with compliance, speed of execution, and really help us to orchestrate where we need automations in the first place.
So this is, and so a lot of this led to the product that you're working on today. So Mello, how do you describe that in a sentence or two?
In a sentence, it's a digital process manager is, the best way I could describe it as quick as possible, right? It helps automate human-centric processes. So where something like a Zapier or N8N automates between different pieces of software, this helps to automate between person A and person B. So connects you to the right person without you having to think about it. You just need to know your piece of the puzzle and it'll automatically manage all the handoffs.
I love the way that you explain it. You're right that Zapier and it connects, will help you connect different software products, but who's going to connect the humans? Who's going to do the orchestration of the humans? And so in some ways, it's like a digital project manager, right? Because it just gets us humans to do the right things at the right time. And a group of us.
Exactly right. Yeah, and that's why I say a project process manager, because we all know what a project manager does. It, makes sure the project stays on time, people do the right things, and it gets accomplished. We can't have a person assigned to a million processes in the organization because there's just so many going on. But if you build that out in a piece of software, it can manage it for you. And so it makes sure it happens the same way and, gets that work done.
Let's start talking about some of the things that you all are doing at the company. So you obviously have that product. And actually, before we go there, maybe we can talk about your journey going back into software, right? Like you said, you did the degree in computer engineering, you went and did some consulting. And then at some point, when did you get back into software? And what was that like? Like, how did you get to the point where today, basically, you're building software most of the time?
You know what? The biggest thing was probably the release of, ChatGPT and these LLMs that you can now use as a crutch essentially to help you through all the areas that you don't necessarily know or, are familiar with. Coming out of computer engineering, usually all of the work you do is very specific projects. And I, worked with this friend of mine who we worked on coding projects together since grade 10. So 7 years of working together, and you sort of manage each of our own pieces. And he would typically do all of the setup. And so I would, do some of the coding later on, but I never had to worry about like, where is this getting set up? How do we manage the back end? That sort of thing. Now you can ask ChatGPT. It's always there for you. You can say, hey, I want to start this project. I want to, build a website that does this thing. Where do I start? What should I know? Right. And it'll give you that information. And, if you can keep asking it questions and, let it know you're a beginner, maybe you don't know all of the context, it can help you through each step of the process. And so that's really what got me back into coding was something that I can now use because I have a general understanding. I can look at the code, I can sort of understand what it's saying. But, I wasn't necessarily super familiar with Python when I began that journey. Now I'm far more familiar with it because it was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is what it's feeding me the code in. I know what it does. I can generally read it. And now I can execute this code or even make changes because it sort of provided the skeleton framework of what I need.
So that's super interesting. I mean, how long was it that you hadn't touched code before you started again?
I would say that I sort of, I would dabble in a project once per year, or if we count like VBA and Excel, obviously I did a lot more stuff related to that
Yeah,
and like
that
more.
that doesn't count. I mean, it is code, but it
Yeah,
doesn't count.
I agree. So then we would say that it was probably, 6 years without actively touching code.
And for all intents and purposes, I mean, stuff moves fast, right? So in 6 years, things look very different than they'll do today. And so, for you understood the computer science concepts, but like you really hadn't touched things. And then through ChatGPT, you managed to relearn all of the things that you knew and then some, right? To practically be able to do what you're able to do today.
Yeah, I would almost liken it to, like slang. You leave high school and you're 2 years out of university and you hear what high school kids are saying. You're like, I don't understand any of these words that are being said, but they're still generally speaking English. So you can get the concept of what's going on. And so similarly, like, yes, 6 years without coding, but you can still generally understand what the code's saying. So obviously there's huge changes to frameworks to whatever else, but you can sort of still see what's going on with the code. And so different, but still the same, right?
The reason I say that is, again, is super interesting because there's all this. I mean, there's all these, I guess, academies that you can go to. There's books you can read. There's online courses. There's all these ways that you can learn how to build software, but you basically started from scratch and had ChatGPT teach you what you needed to do in real time. And I think part of that is very interesting. Like I think we all kind of I don't think anyone's like super surprised that that's possible, right? People probably think that something like that might be possible, but it's really cool to see that you actually did that. And I like your line of questioning, which is you have to know how to be a good beginner, right? With anything. And so, what are the sorts of questions that you would ask if you wanted to start something that you've never done before? So, for example, I mean, let's take some new project that you're going to do. Is there anything that you haven't ever touched before, but you want to get into at some point?
You know what? Not. I'm trying to think right now. I'm sure if I had 10 seconds to think about, it, I would figure something. But I could just talk about like routine that TikTok sort of scraping app that I built, which was like I had no idea where I should even start. I knew that essentially what I wanted to do was build a set of routines off of creators' videos, and that was it. And I didn't know, do I build this through something like N8N Like, is there built-in stuff through TikTok? Is there code that I should be writing? It should be live updating. Where do I store this information? Right. So all of this is sort of a blank. And the line of questioning there is just like, hey, you know what? I want to do this project. Here's generally what it looks like. And for me, when I'm starting these off, my requirement is always like, I want to do this for free at first. I don't want to pay anything. I want some sort of free version that I can build this out, and I'm willing to put a little bit of extra time in to avoid having to pay for a service. And so it's like, okay, well, you need a website. Great. Well, I can buy a website for $10. That's, we'll essentially call that free, you know, and then it'll be like, well, you need to host this information. You need to store it in a database somewhere. And this was a big thing for me. Like, I wasn't aware of what are called slug pages, right? Where you essentially have, you could have this database of 7,000 entries, and each of those is its own web page based on, your URL. It just grabs that piece of information from the database and builds based on that. And so that's what it sort of told me. And it was like, hey, well, here's, Supabase. You can get a free database up to however many rows or bits of data, right? It's like, okay, great. So that's where I'll build that. And then it was like, here are your hosting options. And sometimes it leads you astray, right? There were some issues along that way where it was like, oh yeah, go host over here. And so you set that up, and then it's like, oh, it actually doesn't work integrating that with Supabase. And so now you've got to go and change your host, because you're like, okay, well, that's my, the core is this database that I've already sort of worked on. And so we'll have to work backwards and sort of find something that hosts over there.
It's very interesting. So one thing I want to call out is your approach to questions is a very patient approach, because I think a lot of people, maybe myself included, when we want to go do a project, we're like, tell me step by step specifically how to do this project. But it's almost like you started from the beginning of, if I were to do this kind of a project, what kind of tools would I need? Maybe give me a high level overview of the things. And then one by one questioning, well, what are the ways that I could do this or that? And basically, it sounds like you started with a plan instead of saying, give me the results right away.
Yeah, you're completely right. And this is something that I find that when I am going through this line of questioning to start a new tool, I don't know, I have to beat the hell out of ChatGPT, be like, stop feeding me detailed information. Like, I don't want you to send me the Python script and like all of this stuff, because I don't actually know, like, I haven't narrowed down what exactly I want yet. So a lot of it is I'm almost doing discovery on what I'm going to build as I'm asking. Like you said, high level, I'll say like super high level, like, what are the 5 steps that I need, or what are the 5 things I need? And then based on that, like, let's dive into each one and like build out, bullet points of like, okay, here's the 10 things for each area or each tool or whatever else. And that really helps you narrow down, be like, okay, now I have the general idea. Now I can go and like say, okay, let's build that script, let's do this. Because some of them, it'll send you the script, but like the script is reliant on you using whatever other tools or something else. And it's like, okay, well, maybe I didn't want to use that because of whatever other restrictions I have.
And I think this approach is really important, especially if you are going into something and you don't know all the details. So, in other words, if you weren't going to use ChatGPT, you wouldn't know how to go about it. And so, when you don't know how to go about it, it's kind of dangerous to just go and say, hey, write me the code to do all of these things and build me the whole project. Because, I mean, you're going to run into situations where it's not going to do what you want, or it's going to break somewhere, and it's going to be super difficult to troubleshoot it because you don't have the requisite knowledge to be able to do that. And so starting in this much more patient way of, from first principles, what are the components I need? And then if you don't understand what those are, having it explain that to you. It seems slower in the beginning, but to actually get a project done, it does become a lot faster because you will run into less issues along the way. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. And you still do run into issues. And I feel like a lot of it is due to, like context limitations where like it'll forget what maybe, tool or decisions you've made previously. A big one that I ran into at some point recently was just I was hosting on Cloudflare again because it's free. And the way that you had to sort of access the internal database in Cloudflare was different than like based on the type of site I was using. And that caused a huge amount of issues. And like at this point, I'm like berating ChatGPT, being like, how the hell is this going wrong? We have to fix this. And it turns out it was a really simple thing. It was just the script that I had was in a different file location that, Cloudflare wasn't accessing. And all I had to do was move where that script was hanging out, and the whole problem solved itself. But it was one of those things that, like, I was installing all these extensions to try and get it to properly load on this other side, because ChatGPT is thinking I was like running it as some different type of project than I actually was. And, it's one of those things, like, a day was thrown away just, going back and forth. And in the end, you move the script because you're eventually like, okay, back it up. We've been diving down this rabbit hole for 3 hours or 5 hours or whatever it is. Is there another way? And I think that's really what it comes down to, is like, as you're diving down, if something's not working at first, pulling back and saying, is there actually another way we can solve this problem? Like, maybe you've provided what might be the best answer, but could you give me some other options of how we could solve this? And sometimes it'll come back to you being like, oh yeah, like, you were going for the best option in terms of, functionality, but maybe this is the easiest option over here that'll take you 2 seconds. And you're like, would have been great to do that in the first place.
Okay, so knowing that, what do you do now to maybe not run into that situation as much?
Oh, I was going to say I forget it all the time. I'll find myself, I try and like reduce at least the amount of time that I spend diving down these rabbit holes, where like now instead of spending 6 or 7 hours diving down and then it not working and then going back, if it doesn't work after 3 or 4 attempts, like, let's just pause, ask it again, like, hey, can we do this another way? Is there something simpler? And often, like, something simpler for ChatGPT's mind, we'll say, is not necessarily simpler for a human to execute. So when it gives you at least 3 or 4 options, and this really comes back to like going high level first. So when it proposes you a solution, be like, hey, are there other solutions? And sort of seeing what works best for you in that list. Because, again, we want to make it, especially if you're deploying tools or, different products rapidly, you want to be able to work rapidly. You don't want to get stuck on one for a long period of time.
So that's very interesting. So it seems like at some points you can get stuck in these micro optimizations, and you almost have to, you're in the rabbit hole, it's in the rabbit hole with you, and somehow you have to pull both of yourselves out and take a step back and say, that's a super interesting approach, which is, if you try something 3-4 times before spending 6 or 7 hours on it, to ask the question, is there a simpler way to approach this? That's actually super interesting. I really like that. I mean, of course, we're talking about building software right now, but I think there's a lot of things that, people get ChatGPT to do that I get it to do. And so, and I do get stuck in these rabbit holes. I was trying to get it to help me with this options trading strategy this morning, and it was kind of getting stuck in this rabbit hole. But I'm going to go back now and say, hey, is there a simpler way to do this? This is my objective. And so that's very interesting. And does it work?
Yeah, I think it works. I mean, I haven't run into anything that I've been like, yeah, I haven't been able to solve this. And sometimes, again, like, I'd say at least a couple of times, that rabbit hole is the way you have to go. And it's like, okay, no, we've just got to keep working on this until we find that solution. Like my example of, the script not reading. It's like, you eventually just have to keep asking it question after question. And maybe at a certain point, and I don't remember if this is how I solved it, but then sometimes, a good old fashioned Google search where a human has responded, look on
Google
Reddit or
search,
something.
what's that?
Yeah, a
What's
perplexity
that?
search, sorry.
Okay.
Where, you actually just go for like, find a human answer, because sometimes there is a weird little bit of context that, a human has gone through this, and it's, maybe one only other person has ever experienced this problem, but thankfully they posted the answer on Reddit and you can grab it.
So that kind of gives me an understanding, and hopefully what everybody gets from that is that you can learn pretty much anything. And it's just a line of being patient, getting the high level overview of what you're trying to do step by step, and not jumping into the results. And it may seem slower at first, but it will become, it is faster in the long term. And so, yeah, so thanks for explaining that. Hey everyone, just a quick pause on today's episode to tell you about my day job. In addition to This New Way, I'm the CEO of a company called Fellow.ai, and Fellow is an AI meeting assistant. It joins all your meetings, it summarizes them, tracks the actions and the decision, and does that better than any other tool that you've seen. We've spent a ton of time making sure that the meeting notes and summaries and action items that come out of Fellow are the most accurate, the most precise. It beats any human. You have to try it. But in addition to that, what makes Fellow different is that it is the first AI note taker built from the ground up with security and privacy in mind. This means that you can use it for all your meetings, not just the customer-facing ones, but also the sensitive ones, things like one-on-ones and executive team meetings and those QBRs and everything in between. It's got really good judgment. So, for example, if you start a meeting and you're talking about some social stuff that you don't really want on the record that's going to get emailed to everyone afterwards, Fellow just knows it just doesn't include those things. Or say you have something that you talked about and later on you realize, oh man, that shouldn't have been there. It makes it really easy. You can go back to the meeting, select that part, delete it, and then it's gone from the record. It connects to all of the other tools you use in the organization, whether that's Slack or Asana or HubSpot or Salesforce or Linear or Jira or Confluence, whatever it is, Fellow integrates with all those things. I think the best part is that Fellow also acts as an AI chief of staff. Because it sits on all the meetings and the conversations that you have access to, you can ask it really cool questions such as, what are the biggest opportunities in my company? What are the bottlenecks in engineering? And Fellow just pieces together information, sees trends, and it can answer those sorts of questions. It can even do things like, hey, based on all of the one-on-ones that I've had with this particular person, can you create them a performance review? And it can do things like that too. And the sky's really the limit. What I really wanted you to do is have the opportunity to try out Fellow, check it out, and we're making a special offer available to all our listeners. So just go to fellow.ai/thisnewway to try Fellow. There's a discount code in there for you if you decide to continue with it. Either way, I would love for you to try it and let me know what you think. And with that said, let's go back to the episode. Since we talked about it, we can kind of jump into it as well. So the first thing that I guess you started playing with was building this TikTok breakdown app, right? So can we see it? What does it do?
Yeah, absolutely. But essentially, what it does is there's a few steps to it. From the start, I wanted to be able to grab a bunch of TikTok videos that we'll go to the code itself here. I want to grab a bunch of TikTok URLs. And so I asked ChatGPT for a script that would grab a whole bunch of videos that were related to routines. People love to do routines on, like their morning routine, a gym workout routine, a get ready with me type thing. The idea being that, if you are doing like a get ready with me or a gym workout routine and you see a guy who's super buff, you're like, man, I want to do that same workout routine. What if you could just download it onto your phone through an app and then, add sort of a social aspect to it, kind of like a Duolingo, where now you could say, oh, like I've done this routine 600 times and I'm on like a 400-day streak. And, like my friend's doing the same one, that sort of thing. So I thought that would be kind of cool. But to do that, I need to grab a bunch of routines just to fill up the tool. And so it provided me with a script to go and grab a whole bunch of TikToks. And this was sort of just like a TikTok scraper, pulls this stuff up, grabs the TikToks according to, a few different searches. Like here it was morning routine, gym study routine, that sort of thing.
And how is it doing it? Are you using any external scraping tools that are being called via API or something like that?
Yeah, but like Playwright was one here where it was sort of
Hmm.
searching, and I had to also grab my cookies. Again, TikTok or ChatGPT told me, like, okay, go grab your cookies, put them in here, and we'll reference those so that you could access a bunch of videos really quickly. Otherwise,
Hmm.
TikTok's going to block you as you're trying to go and grab all these. So from this, I then built, I built, ChatGPT built another script that would go and grab the routine. It's probably not this one. Well, it might be this one. You can tell I don't look at these much after I write them or have them written for me. But basically, this goes and runs through each video, and there's sort of three options for how it grabs the routine. The first thing it's going to do is just listen to the transcript, or it can grab the transcript. There's a tool that'll just like build that out for you instantly. There is potentially the caption might have the steps in it, so some people will list those steps out in the caption, or it'll be on the screen. So we need to use OCR to read what is on the screen, right? And that's kind of the general idea. And so what will happen is it'll read the transcript, and if there's no transcript or there's too few words, it says, okay, let me check the caption. And if the caption's also clear, then it reads the screen. And maybe it comes up with no routine and it just dumps the TikTok and moves on. But if it finds something, it builds out that routine and it pushes it into my Supabase database. And at that point, it's sort of ready to be, built on the website. There is some stuff like the routines don't come out the clearest. So if someone's like, it's using OCR to read the screen. If there was something in the background, like let's say, a Rogue fitness piece of equipment, it might read Rogue as well. And
Mhm.
so what I need to do is I built some stuff to actually go and clean up the routines for weird text that was showing up, especially actually skincare products were the biggest messy one because someone would show the piece of, like the skincare product they're using to the screen. And so it would read that and it would just put in, like the product name. So part of that was clearing out product names and stuff like that. And a lot of this was done through OpenAI's API, just to be like, hey, like let's make sense of this and try and clean it up a little bit. And I actually ran this sort of like twice. There was also things here. So like here's a prompt that I had just saying, hey, you're ruthless editor of these routine steps, remove any hashtags, keep only the actual steps, merge duplicates, stuff like that. So there's a lot of duplicates as well because on the OCR, it might have like 5 screens in a row where that text is on, right?
Mhm.
So all of that is just to set up the database. And the database itself, this is in Supabase here, but we can sort of see we'd have to have this database that has the routine title, the creator, the video URL, and then a bunch of other stuff like the steps and things like that. And this is what the website goes and grabs, which I then have over here. And we can see all of these routines that it's built out, right? So I'm just grabbing the name directly from whatever the TikTok video name was. And we can see all of these on here based on all of the different routines that people have built out. And some of them, like I haven't cleaned all of these up necessarily. But if we look into one in particular, we can see, happy Friday morning routine. And we've got the video on the side here. We've got, what his steps are, this guy. And if I just refresh the video, we can see, coffee in the news, 6 a.m., right? And so we can see that the first step is coffee in the news. And there's a bunch of screens. So it's reading off the screen. This is shower. And so we've got shower here is the second step. Get dressed is on there. And so you kind of get the gist of, it takes each step along the way and just puts it into this list. And this is kind of just all I was doing when I was building this out is like, let's see if people are interested in this kind of, tool or app or content. And so all I'm doing basically at this point is just tracking, do people click on this thing? On the homepage down here, you can register for the app or say I'm a creator if you were interested in signing up. And so I'm also tracking if anyone's registering that sort of,
Ye
because the idea is
yeah.
with enough interest, I'll build it out.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, so just to kind of recap what we saw. So you built an app that pulled information from TikTok, found videos that were likely to have a routine in them, and it basically breaks down the routine. So what I'm seeing on screen here is the video is on the right, and on the left is all of the steps. Like you said in this video, it seems to be a morning routine of sorts. So coffee on the news and so on and so forth. And but it's not just for this video, it's for all the videos that you kind of grabbed. And so by the way, like this is super interesting, right? That you were able to build software that does all of this. And without the software, if you wanted to do this, you'd have to do it manually. You'd have to watch all these videos. And now you can do all of this at scale. And you didn't write any of the code. ChatGPT wrote all of the code. But yeah, it's super interesting to see a project like this come into play. And Scott, I know that maybe when you were doing this back then, Codex was not around, or was Codex an option back then?
It may have just become an option, but I wasn't using it. I was just smashing prompts into ChatGPT the whole time and then
Okay,
copying and
okay. So
pasting the code.
yeah, lots of copying and pasting. And so today, do you use Codex?
Uh, Sometimes, yes. I actually just started recently, and it's great because it takes your prompt and goes and edits the code for you, and then creates its own branch that you can then merge into your main branch and deploy.
So Codex is their agentic code, I guess, editor.
Yeah,
And yeah, so now you can access it on the web, which is, well, actually, I think you could always access it on the web.
yeah,
And some people use it there. And you can also get a plugin for VS Code
yeah. In
on your
here as well.
desktop
Yep.
if you want that too. And VS Code, for those that don't know, is a free code editor. So you can download that, and it is used for code, but you can also use it just navigate a whole bunch of files if you wanted to do that. But yeah, you download VS Code, and then you can get the Codex plugin, connect your, I guess, API keys from ChatGPT. And if you don't know how to do that, you can ask ChatGPT to tell you what to do. But once you're set up like that, you can start building really, really cool apps like this.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, this is great. So this was kind of like the beginning, right? This was when you started the journey. This was amongst the first big projects.
Yeah, well, this is actually very recently. I did this probably 2 months ago, 3 months ago,
Oh,
something
okay.
like that. Yeah, this is a recent one that it was late August, and I was like, I want to stop playing around with, Mello and trying to sell that right now. I want to do something else. And so I just jumped on this. And my big problem when I get into coding a tool like this is it takes up my entire brain all day, every day. Like I go from, doing other stuff to like 12 hours a day. I'm just like staring at this because I want that problem solved. So maybe I should have gone into coding because, I love it, but I also love the ability to like, once I have this MVP, stepping away and being like, okay, let's just take a break from this and see what happens.
Okay, super cool. So what else are we going to talk about today? What else are you going to show?
Well, I can show, we talked about the N8N automation of like a cold
Yeah, let's
outreach
talk about
system.
that.
All
Yeah, so
right.
you basically built an N8N automation system. So N8N
Yeah.
is a workflow builder. It's becoming really popular. And so maybe let's just describe what did you, before you even started to build it, why did you want to build an outreach system? What was your goal with this project?
Like I said before, most of my goals when it comes to this stuff is what can I do for free instead of paying a tool like Smartlead or Clay or whatever else to, do this stuff for me. Because again, I could pay someone $200 a month and this would essentially be, handled entirely built in with a lot more features. But for something simple like what I'm doing, I don't necessarily need this whole stack of features if, it works at a base level. And I started jumping into this in the first place to manage my hockey team's attendance. So you'll see here, I've got a bunch of scripts that run, my hockey team's attendance. But and that's just, who's showing up to the game, that sort of thing. And so this is that cold outreach system. Basically, other than paying for like a Google Workspace account and Notion account, there's a few tokens that get used up over here for, OpenAI's chat model, but the rest of this is entirely free. So a cheap model. And part of this is I'm running N8N hosted on my local machine. So you can obviously pay to have it cloud hosted, and it's pretty cheap. It's, $35 a month or something like that. Again, to make it free, you can host this on your own machine. ChatGPT helped me set the whole thing up. I was like, hey, how do I get this thing running so it's self-hosted? Hadn't done that before, but here we are. So the steps as we're going through just high level is basically I've got a spreadsheet that has, whatever leads I want on here. And there are tools that you can get, find your leads, filter them out for free, things like Apollo. You get however many searches or people in the searches. And so you can filter through, add people, get their email addresses, put them into a sheet. This automation is going to read the sheet and it's going to filter out who has replied to this. So if anyone's replied, we're just going to skip over them. For anyone who hasn't replied, we're actually going to look through and check for new replies, right?
So how do you know if someone has replied or not? What is it doing there?
So I'll jump over to the sheet to give a little clarity there. It's as simple as I have a status. So we've got the person on here. And so I've added a fake email for you so that we can demo this in a second. But it changes the status based on where they are to what they're at. So they could opt out, they might have replied, or there's sort of three sends along the way, right? So it checks in the first place, let's just find anyone who's replied. We're not going to run them through the rest of the automation, right? So that's what we're doing right here is just
Okay, so
we've
it's
read the
just
sheet.
based on the spreadsheet. So it looks at the
Exactly.
spreadsheet. If the column that says they have replied or not is replied, then it does something. If not, it does something else. Okay,
Exactly. If they replied, it actually does nothing. They're done.
right.
Don't need to worry about them or opt out really. So then it loops through, and now we're going to check my email for anyone who's replied. So we have the spreadsheet, but this needs to update the spreadsheet. So anyone who's replied, we then update the spreadsheet, and we
And
either
so,
loop.
how does it figure out if it's replied? So it could be any email. So, for example,
Yeah.
what if it's an out of office reply? How do you handle that?
So in this particular case, any automation, right? We can add even more and more complexity, and I'm happy to talk to that. But in this particular case, if I get an out of office, that would technically trigger this. Now, the way I manage that myself is if I get an out of office, I just delete it.
Okay.
Not relevant to me, so I'll just delete it. And sometimes I might go in here and we'll see like the next step date on here. I might manually change this. Like if they're out of office says, okay, I'm out of office until November 15th, I might change this to, November 17th. And that way it's not going to message them again until they're back in the office. But yeah, so at the moment, if someone sent an out of office and I did nothing with that, it would say they replied, and it would just, follow that process. In this case, it would add to the CRM, but there's, again, a lot of complexity that we could add to this, like sentiment analysis or even reading the response to decide how it's going to handle this next part, right? But at a high level, we're just saying, okay, let's process each person in the list, right? Once we've processed everyone, we're going to read the sheet again because we've updated it. And so it's not reading it constantly in this automation. So we need to go back and say, okay, now that we've had, this information update, what is the new information that we're seeing here inside of the sheet, right? Because we've gone through, we've maybe changed some to replied or different send stages. And then we go through a switch, which is just saying, like, where are we in the process? So if it's a new person, what we're going to do is I want to go to their homepage of their website. So again, I have that listed on here so we know that the homepage of the company.
And how do you know if it's a new person?
If we know it's a new person based on this status column right here.
Oh, okay.
So
got it.
Every time I add someone, if I was putting in some new person here, mark something, and I would just say this is new, right? So now it would go through and be like, that's a new person, right? So this is just a manual part of the process, which again, if you paid for a tool, or I could build an automation really that managed this whole thing so that I didn't have to go and manually do this. But it's really about, every automation has, sort of max value that you're getting from it. So it might take more time for me to put in to build that automation out than it would the value I get from having it running, right? It takes me 10 hours to do it, but it saves me 10 seconds a day. That's going to be a long time for a payback, right?
Yeah.
So in this particular case, there's no payback to do that. So I just, run that through. So we reread it, and all we're reading for is like, what is their status? And going over here, the first email, so we've got 3 emails in this thread, right? As we're doing this outreach, there's a number of touch points, and obviously people throw tons of money at this, and how do we get the best messaging, that sort of thing. But basically I have 3 email touch points where I'm saying, like, the first one I want to be hyper personalized. The second and third, I don't really care. I'm just going to look at the email I sent them. And this is the case. They haven't responded, right? So everything up here, we have not received a response. So we're just sending them another note to be like, hey, maybe I caught you at a busy time, or I just want to follow up, something like that. And there's best practices around that. But my first email I want personalized. The other 2, I'm just sending a standard email that's saying, like, hey, thought I caught you a bad time, or like, hey, I'm not going to reach out anymore. Is there someone better I should talk to? Right. This first one that's personalized, essentially what I wanted to do, and again, you can dive in, you could be extracting so much intent data or, specific information on each customer. And that's where a tool like Clay is useful, where I can, summarize everything about them and their company. But in this particular case, my thought was, again, I'm using this for free. Maybe all I want is just to personalize it around their website, right? So I am going to grab the website. I'm going to extract all of the HTML. So I'm just going to grab all of the content from their homepage or whatever page I might want. And I'm going to feed that into the OpenAI chat model to help better structure a email to them. And so for this one, you see it's basically LLMs chain. I'll double click into this. And essentially, maybe this is the wrong part. I need to double click up here. You put a prompt in and you choose your model. But basically, we're saying, hey, you know what? I want you to respond in the following format. We're writing a cold email to this person introducing Mello. And we're saying, Mello's a digital process manager, blah, 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 blah. And then we give them the context for the website and just say, hey, if there's a clear connection between what they do and the types of processes Mello's helped with, let's, mention it. Otherwise, keep it brief, right? Keep it in the, whatever the tone is, that sort of thing. And even stuff like this, like getting a good prompt it's always good to go to ChatGPT and ask it, like, I need to write this email. What's a really good prompt to have this context? And again, going back and forth there to narrow down what's the best possible input you can give to ChatGPT so that you get a good output on the other side, right?
So effectively, it's this process automation is looking in the spreadsheet. If it's a new person, it does a little bit of searching to find out about the new person. And then it takes that information that it found out, uses ChatGPT's API in the background, and then writes a custom message. And then it sends a custom message, and it looks like that it updates the spreadsheet all over again. Yeah, This is
Exactly.
pretty cool. And then this process, this entire process where it will send up to 3 emails, is this all running on a weekly basis or daily basis, or what triggers this workflow to start running?
At the moment, it's just set to when I click execute workflow down here, but
Got
you
it.
can easily set up triggers. So if I open this up over on the side here, there are so many different node types that you can use inside of N8N, but similarly with a Zapier or whatever else. But if I want to add another trigger, we can see there's manual. There could be an event from a webhook of something else coming in. It could be a daily schedule, on a webhook call, that sort of thing. So there's like 6 million ways that we can start this workflow off. I could have it through a Slack chat, right? Where I said, like, start outreach today or whatever that happens to be.
So, Scott, here are my conclusions based on seeing you show this. So the first is, I mean, there's this trend of tiny teams, right? And tiny teams get to do a lot more, even though they're not that many people, right? This is an entire automation that basically sends emails to all your prospects, even writes them custom emails, right? So if you're thinking of, maybe some people have figured out, oh, I can use ChatGPT to write custom emails if I grab information about them. But this thing automates the entire process. It goes from a spreadsheet of contacts to a customized emails for all of them and does all of that in one place. And you're not even really paying for any other tool. Like, the cost is very minimal. Yeah, there's some costs on the edges here, but very, very minimal. And you're right. Like, if you were to do this with some other tools like Clay, like we use Clay at Fellow and so on and so forth. But this is like, the fact that this is possible, it's making me understand that there's almost like an arbitrage of, you can pay for the tool, but because of what AI has enabled, you no longer need to pay for the tool if you're willing to trade your time. So if you're willing to trade your time, the tools are now there. AI makes it possible for you to build your own workflows. And so you can build your own custom software that does exactly what you want. Yes, there's other bells and whistles in these other tools, but maybe you don't need all those things. Maybe you just need a 10% subset. And if you're willing to trade the time, then you can build that tool and then it becomes exactly what you want. You have full control of it. And it doesn't costs almost nothing to run, which is kind of a crazy thing to say.
Yeah. And, I could hit execute here and we can even watch it go through, right? Where it reads the sheet, it jumps through everything. It moved the one item that said replied here. We go through, it's checking, it makes sure it's like, okay, nothing's getting added to the CRM. We go up. And this
Yeah,
is for,
it's
the fake
super
you.
cool. Yeah, for people who are watching in, what we're seeing is there's all these nodes, they're all connected to each other. And it looks like you're following along. The right node gets highlighted, some execution happens, it takes one path, and then you kind of follow it along. And it's really cool. It's like this agent that's just working for you in the background, doing
Yep.
work.
And if we jump back to the spreadsheet, we can see that it's now, qualified. It's sent. We can see the last contact date, the next step date, and this is data that it'll use to reply to that thread as we go forward. Um,
Yeah. I mean, this is amazing, right? Like, I know some people are, by the way, some people are using tools like Clay and so on and so forth, and they're great software. But I think, like, a lot of people are not. Like, a lot of people are still doing manual, sending emails, customizing it one by one on ChatGPT. And yeah, this is pretty cool. And so it's creating like a draft for you in your inbox.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is one that I created. And again, what I'm doing right now, like this first one I draft because sometimes it gets a little funky if you're having AI write it. But on a mass scale, maybe you don't care, right? You're sort of like firing off a shotgun, being like, let's hope it hits something. Um, but I personally am trying to make it a little more targeted. But here, it says like, hey, Aydin, I'm the founder, digital process manager that runs onboarding compliance workflows. Given Fellow's secure org-wide meeting notes and action items, Mello can trigger and guide downstream steps across finance, HR, IT, and operations, so post-meeting work actually gets done the same way every time. Happy to share. That's a good note. Like, I'm
Yeah,
happy
that's
with
quite
how
good.
that. It's probably better than I would have come up with.
I love that it creates a draft. It doesn't send it right away, so you have that human in the loop just in case, right? You just like, if you hire an intern, you might want to check their work before it hits production. So this is kind of like a similar flow. Scott, this is insane. Like, it's crazy that you're able to build all of this stuff, replace software that costs hundreds of dollars a month, right, to run. So thank you so much for showing this for us. Hey, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the episode. One of the common things that we hear is, hey, you all talk about all these different tools. You walk through these demos. Sometimes it's hard for me to follow along. We decided to do recently was take all the things that we talk about, put them in a weekly newsletter. We literally list all the tools, we link to them, and any demo that we walk through, we break it down step by step, put it in this newsletter so it's super easy for you to follow along. And the other nice thing is that if there's someone on your team that you think could benefit, they're working on that subject area, they could use a little bit of AI injection into their workflow, send them the newsletter, send them that particular episode. We make it super easy to do that. It's free to sign up. All you have to do is go to thisnewway.com, enter your email address, and you'll get this weekly email from us. Hope you enjoy it. With that said, let's go back to the episode. I know we're running against time here, so thank you for showing both workflows. Like super cool to see. One question that we always like to ask everybody who comes on the show as sort of our final question is, what are you the most excited for over the next 12 months? Is there something that you want to be able to do with AI that you can't quite do, a trend that you really like and like where it's heading? What's most exciting for you?
Most exciting for me is, I think, almost learning. There's infinite applications to AI, especially when you start building it into these automated processes. I'm most excited to see the next level of that and how we can elevate work for people as they need to do these different processes, right? For me, my brain is very process thinking. My tool itself is like that. I love to see how humans and AI can work better together. There was that article recently, like 95% of AI implementations fail. And it's failing because it's sort of not implemented properly and people just don't know how they're supposed to interact. I would love to see, better ways for people to interact and make sense of it. Because there's a big complaint with modern software tools where it's like, yeah, you've got AI, but like, what is that really doing for me? I think we're going to start getting that next level of tooling where it actually is providing value.
I think the authors of that study never met you, Scott. Otherwise, maybe they would have written differently about that study. I think like the other conclusion for me here is that we all know that these LLMs are really good. I mean, they're language models, so they write great English, they write great French, they write these languages, but code is just another language. And it turns out that they can also do the same thing. So all the wonders that we're seeing that it's doing for natural language, the fact that it can do it with code just means that now you can build software and it's making it accessible. So if anyone hasn't tried vibe coding, you've listened to a few episodes, it's a good time to try it. Like if you were to recommend someone get started, like what is the easiest place for them to go?
Whatever your favorite tool is for as an LLM right now, and start from the beginning, right? Let it know the context that you have no experience in this. You'd love to get started on a really easy app, and heck, make it something that's relevant to you, right? Like I said, for me, I manage my hockey team's attendance. That's a super simple task that it's like, okay, here's some suggestions in terms of how you could do that, how you could manage it, and what works for you in there. So really it's just start asking questions and see if that's, worth the time, but start easy, right? Get some small wins because that'll make you feel better and more comfortable. And when you have the small wins, you'll feel more comfortable to take the next step and be able to ask the right questions as you go further.
It's funny. I was trying to get my kids to learn vibe coding. So we started together and I'm like, what game do you want to build? Let's build a game. And they're like, I want you to build Minecraft. I'm like, no, that's very complex. We have to describe Minecraft is going to take a week. Let's start with something simple. How about we create like an ice cream maker? Just like simple animations, simple images. So yeah, but everybody give this a try if you haven't yet. Vibe coding is here to stay. It's getting easier and easier. And Scott, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat.
All right. Thank you.
And that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of This New Way. If you like the content, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you can get notified when we post the next episode. See you next time.